So I'm making this recording of The Heart of Yoga, trying to get caught up in Novastella's yoga teacher training and reading and make it available to the other students if they wish. Just an audio version of the book that wasn't available on Audible, so I figured out a way to get this thing to read, and I'll get it going. And you guys, if you are watching it, let me know how long you want the videos to be. And like, for now I'm thinking a couple hours at a time, and then you can adjust the speed of the playback in YouTube, and if you close out of YouTube, you should be able to pick the video back up right where it was. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get the text-to-speech started.
Forward. I am grateful to have the opportunity to write about Sri Dzikakar, an exceptional yoga teacher, and it is with great pleasure that I write these few words to underline the importance of Sri Dzikakar's teaching. What a nice person Dzikakar is. One feels attracted to him. To be with him is a pleasure. His simplicity is one of the exceptional characteristics of his personality. He does not pretend in any way. In today's world, it is refreshing to meet someone who knows so much and yet is so modest. Humility, from which simplicity follows, is a very precious quality. Dzikakar is one of those few people who truly lives this quality. The years Dzikakar spent at university attaining his engineering degree have not been an impediment. On the contrary, once I asked what helped him most in the work he does now, and he replied, "My engineering studies." It is likely that such training stimulated his sparkling intelligence, which later gave him the ability to transmit his teaching with clarity and precision. When Dzikakar speaks, he expresses himself in a natural and easy way, in a language that each one of us can understand and follow. He walks toward you with a light step, and his delightful smile lets you know that his heart is open. I received a precious gift one day when he chanted for me and my friends. His clear sounds had a delicate and yet powerful flow, following the rhythm that arose from his lovely voice. The enchanting atmosphere created by the vibrations of that sound filled the room and remained a long time after he left. Dzikakar helps us realize that what is essential in the practice of yoga is the breath, because each pose, each movement, originates from there. This balanced union brings harmony and order to our bodies and minds. The way he can communicate these very special yoga teachings is extraordinary. He has great respect for the subject and for the person to whom he is conveying his knowledge. He does not push you into it, but very gently leads you to the door that eventually, and unexpectedly, may open to let you in. Vanda Scaravelli, Florence, Italy. Krishnamacharya at the completion of his university studies, 1925. Sri Tatisa Brahmatantra Parkala Swami, one of Krishnamacharya's preceptors. Krishnamacharya lecturing in Madras. Introduction. Krishnamacharya of 100 years. Sri Krishna Brahmatantra Swami, another of Krishnamacharya's preceptors. Krishnamacharya's healing hands. The life and yoga of Sri T. Krishnamacharya. An interview with T. K. B. Dzikakar Tirumalai. Krishnamacharya was born on November 18, 1888, in a village in the state of Mysore, South India. He was born into a family that traces its roots back to the famous 9th century South Indian sage Natha Muni, author of the Yogura and the first teacher in the line of Vaishnava gurus. Krishnamacharya received his first instruction in Sanskrit and yoga from his father before becoming a pupil at the Brahmatantra Parkalama in Mysore, one of the best known and most respected Brahmin schools. Enrolled at the age of 12, he studied the Vedic texts and learned the Vedic rituals while simultaneously attending the Royal College of Mysore. At the age of 18 he moved to Benares, where he studied Sanskrit, logic, and grammar at the university. Back in Mysore, he received a thorough grounding in the philosophy of the Vedanta from Sri Krishna Brahmatantra Swami, the director of the Parkalama. Then he went north again to study the Skya, India's oldest philosophical system and the one on which yoga is fundamentally based. In 1916 he went to the Himalayas where, at the foot of Mount Kailash, he met his teacher, Sri Ram Mohan Brahmachari, a learned yogi who was living with his family near Lake Manasaravar in Tibet. Krishnamacharya at age 84. Krishnamacharya spent more than 7 years with this teacher, who exercised considerable influence over the direction he took in life, giving him the great task of spreading the message of yoga and using his abilities as a healer and helper of sick people. Consequently, Sri Krishnamacharya did not embark upon an academic career, but returned to the south where he studied Ayurveda, the traditional Indian healing system, as well as the philosophy of Nyaya, a Vedic school of logic recognized for its tools of inquiry and emphasis on discrimination gained by valid knowledge. In 1924 he returned to Mysore, where the Raja, a progressive ruler, gave him the opportunity to open a yoga school. The Raja himself was one of Krishnamacharya's most enthusiastic students. From 1933 to 1955 Krishnamacharya taught yoga at the school and wrote his first book, Yoga Makarandam, Secrets of Yoga. Krishnamacharya patron and student, Krishnarajendra Wadoyar IV, the Maharaja of Mysore. By this time his reputation was spreading throughout South India and beyond. Krishnamacharya's first Western students came to study yoga with him in 1937. Indra Devi was among them. B. K. S. Iyengar, who was to become Krishnamacharya's brother, in law, received his first yoga instruction with the acclaimed teacher. In 1939 and 1940, Krishnamacharya was visited by a French medical team who wanted to verify that an experienced yogi could deliberately stop his heartbeat. For Sri Krishnamacharya, this much marveled, at examination was a rather bothersome demonstration, one that he undertook out of feeling responsible to validate yoga in the eyes of the skeptical scientific world. B. K. S. Iyengar at age 24 demonstrating Bhujapadasana. Soon Krishnamacharya's interest and work turned toward treating the sick, using Ayurveda and yoga as healing agents. He became increasingly well known, and in 1952 was summoned to Madras to treat a popular politician who had suffered a heart attack. Finally, Krishnamacharya settled in Madras with his family. Krishnamacharya at age 46 in Samasthiti. As well as his Indian students, more Westerners came to Madras to study. Gerard Blitz, who brought these teachings to Europe, was one of the first to seek out Krishnamacharya, as was Jean Klein, the Advaita teacher. In 1976, T. K. V. Dazikakar, Krishnamacharya's son, and one of his closest disciples, founded the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram, an institution where yoga is used to treat sick people, and is taught to both Indian and foreign students. Sri Krishnamacharya was teaching and inspiring those around him until 6 weeks prior to his death in 1989. Q. As both son and student of Sri Krishnamacharya, you must have been one of the people closest to him and one of those who knew him best. Can you please tell us something about Krishnamacharya, the Sanskrit scholar, healer, and yogi? A. The foremost reason my father became a scholar of Sanskrit was because of his family tradition. In the old days, people like my father's forebears were well known as advisors, even to the kings. Nowadays we would call my father's grandfather something like Prime Minister, for example, but at that time the position of Prime Minister was not a political one in the way that we now know it. He was rather an advisor who told the rulers what was right and what was wrong. For this purpose, these scholars naturally studied the old texts, which are all written in Sanskrit. So at that time it was perfectly normal for someone who grew up in the milieu in which my father did to become versed in Sanskrit. It was the language of these circles, just as today English is the language of technology. In his formal education he had to learn Sanskrit well enough to be able to read and study the classic texts that describe the branches of the Vedas. Yoga is just one of those branches, but my father developed a special interest in yoga because his family was historically involved with yoga. One of his ancestors was the famous yogi Natha Muni. The interest in yoga is like a thread going right through the history of this family, and my father simply picked it up. His first teacher was his own father. He pursued this interest further when he studied with great masters in the north of India, and he found his own special teacher, Ram Mohan Brahmachari, in the region of Lake Manasaravar in the Himalayas. Krishnamacharya stayed with his teacher for nearly 8 years. Ram Mohan Brahmachari instructed him in the Yoga Sutra and taught him how to help the sick by means of yoga. Much of what is seen as the uniqueness of my father's work comes from this teacher. Krishnamacharya teaching a Western student, 1954. It is normal for someone with a family tradition like this to become a great Sanskrit scholar and to be versed in the literature and religion given to us in the Vedas. But because his teacher said to him, "You must spread the message of yoga," Krishnamacharya decided to become a yoga teacher. He turned down many offers of professorships in Sanskrit, in logic, in Vedanta and other subjects. He immersed himself in everything he had been taught and finally became a guru. It was no easy matter indeed, there were inner struggles for him, but he did it. Another important point was that, through his interest in religion, especially his own tradition of the Vaishnava, Krishnamacharya came across the teachings of some great yogis of South India. These people are called Alvar, which means someone who has come to us to rule. Alvar direct the minds of other people and are regarded as an incarnation of God. Their greatness is bestowed upon them as babies, and many of them are not from Brahmin families but sometimes come from simple peasant families. They were born into the world as extraordinary people. Sri Krishnamacharya studied the writings of these masters, which are in our language of Tamil, and so discovered the meaning of yoga as it is understood in the south of India. This is how he could combine the great teachings from the north, learned from his teacher in the Himalayas, with the great teachings of the south, which come from our Tamil masters, the Alvar. Q. Was it required at that time that someone taking this path should go to the Himalayas and live there with the master? A. No, this was krishnamacharya's personal decision. He decided that he wanted to learn everything about the Vedic Darsanas, the various systems of Indian thought, because some of his views were not accepted by his teachers. When he was attending lectures on SKA and MMA with Makron SA with Makron in Mysore, he vowed he would go to the best universities in India and learn all there was to learn about various schools of Indian thought. In those days, the best place for studying these was Kashi, now known as Varanasi or Banaras, so he went there. He was lucky to have the opportunity to go there, because the teachers there recognized his special abilities. It was in Banaras, where Krishnamacharya met a teacher named Ganganath Jha, who recommended he go to a great yoga teacher in the north. That is how he went to Tibet. It was not a requirement, but instead almost chance. Q. And the healer Krishnamacharya? A. For most people yoga is purely a spiritual discipline, but it is clear that for my father, yoga included other things as well. One of the biographies written about him relates how he was concerned with the sick even as a student. My father himself told me that once he was asked to come to the British governor, who suffered from diabetes. My father was able to help him, then left to continue his studies in the north, at Mount Kailash. The ability to heal must have come from his own background. Probably it was his father, who first gave him tips on how to treat diabetes and other illnesses, for in Natha Muni's Yogura we find many remarks about the use of yoga in the treatment of sick people. Illness is an obstacle on the road to spiritual enlightenment, that is why you have to do something about it. There are many ways of treating sickness through yoga. Sometimes a mantra is needed, sometimes a change of diet, sometimes certain asanas, and sometimes prema. Probably Krishnamacharya had heard about all of this early in life and wanted to learn more about it. It became clear to him that if he wanted to learn more about healing, he would have to learn about Ayurveda. So he went to a well-known teacher named Krishna Kumar in Bengal and stayed with him in order to learn Ayurveda. Eventually, as well as knowing Natha Muni's teachings about how to use yoga to promote good health, my father had all the knowledge of Ayurveda at his fingertips. This is how he knew the importance of the pulse for giving information about a person's condition. He learned this from masters as well as by studying the old texts on the subject. Krishnamacharya always took the pulse of anyone who came to him. One of the first things he taught me was how to take someone's pulse. Being able to diagnose a condition through taking the pulse and using Ayurveda and Natha Muni's yogic health system were the means krishnamacharya used when he gave advice on physical, mental, and spiritual wellness. So it is not surprising that he sometimes performed real miracles. Dizikakar making a diagnosis based on the pulse. Q. What makes Krishnamacharya's yoga so unique? A. What makes my father's yoga teachings unique is his insistence on attending to each individual, and to his or her uniqueness. If we respect each person individually, it naturally means we will always start from where each person currently is. The starting point is never the teacher's needs but those of the student. This requires many different approaches. There is not just one approach for everybody. The way yoga is taught nowadays often gives the impression that there is one solution to everyone's problems and one treatment for every illness. But yoga affects the mind, primarily, and each person's mind is different. Indeed, the culture and background of each person is different as well. In every case, my father chose what seemed necessary and useful. Sometimes it might be asanas, sometimes it was a prayer. Sometimes he even told people to stop a certain yoga practice, then the healing occurred. There are many stories I could tell, all of which show the necessity for an individual approach to yoga. By this I do not mean that I have to give only private lessons, but I must create an atmosphere in my classes in which each student can find his or her own way to yoga. I have to realize that each of my students is not the same person today as they were yesterday, and not at all the same as when they came last week, perhaps with similar questions. This is the most important message my father passed on, and it is essentially the opposite of what is currently being taught in most places. The essence of my father's teachings is this: it is not that the person needs to accommodate him, or herself to yoga, but rather the yoga practice must be tailored to fit each person. I would even go so far as to say that this is what makes my father's approach different from most of the others around today, where everything is well organized and you have to fit into a certain structure. With Krishnamacharya's yoga there is no organization, and the individual must find her or his own structure. Krishnamacharya and student performing EKA for the Sarvangasana. This implies that progress on the path of yoga means different things for different people. We must not obstruct this progress by deliberately setting certain goals. Yoga serves the individual, and does so through inviting transformation rather than by giving information. These are two very different things. For instance, this book gives information about various topics, but in order to bring about transformation, I would explain each topic in a different way to each person. My father taught us more ways to approach a person in yoga than I have found anywhere else. Who should teach whom? When? And what? These are the important questions to be asked in beginning a practice. But underlying all these is the most important question of all: how can the power of the breath be utilized? That is something quite exceptional. Nowhere else is the breath given so much importance, and our work has proven that the breath is a wonder drug, if I may use this term. Dizikakar chanted Water Make a Lot, age 10, accompanying on the Veena, Germany, 1992. Q. As well as the breath, you, like your father, use many sounds and mantra. Mantra belong to the Indian tradition. Can we in the West relate to this aspect of Krishnamacharya's yoga? A. You must understand the word mantra correctly. It is not a Hindu symbol but rather something much more universal. It is something that can bring a person's mind to a higher plane. Sound has a lot of power, the voice has a tremendous influence. Just think about how an orator can capture an audience just by the way he speaks. In our Indian tradition we have made use of these qualities of sound. We use Sanskrit words, but your language too is made up of sounds. In India we use mantra because, by virtue of their religious tradition, they mean something to many people. But I would never use a mantra indiscriminately. We can always work within an individual's tradition. What is universally true is that sounds can have a powerful influence on us. Our work proves this again and again. Q. Can you say something about the concept of structuring your yoga practice intelligently? The concept of Visakrama. A. First I must ask, what do you mean by intelligently? You are probably familiar with the argument that doing the headstand brings more blood into the head. Somebody who has the feeling that the blood supply to the head is not good enough then comes to the conclusion that the headstand is the best asana for them. But first we should think this through. Do we all suffer from a deficient supply of blood to the head simply because we stand and walk upright? Suppose that someone is haunted by this idea so much that he begins to practice the headstand every day, if possible first thing in the morning, perhaps as the first or only asana. Our experience in working with all kinds of people has taught us that people who do this eventually suffer from enormous problems in the neck, that then result in great tension and stiffness in that area and a decreased supply of blood to the whole musculature of the neck, precisely the opposite of what they hoped they would achieve. An intelligent approach to yoga practice means that, before you begin, you are clear about the various aspects of the asana you wish to practice, and know how to prepare for them in such a way that you reduce or negate any undesired effects. With regard to the headstand, for example, the questions are, is my neck prepared for this? Can I breathe well in the asana? Is my back strong enough to raise the entire weight of my legs? To approach your practice intelligently means to know all the implications of what you want to do, whether that be asana or prima, and to make appropriate preparations and adjustments. It is not enough to jump if you want to reach the sky. Taking an intelligent approach means working toward your goal step by step. If you want to travel overseas, the first thing you need is a passport. Then you need visas for the countries you intend to visit, and so forth. The simple fact that you want to go there does not make the trip possible. All learning follows this pattern. Q. How did Krishnamacharya see the significance of asanas in the practice of yoga? A. My father never saw yoga simply as a physical practice. Yoga was much more about reaching the highest, which for him was God. So for Krishnamacharya, yoga meant taking steps that would lead to God in order to become one with God. This path demands much from those who follow it, a strong will, trust, and the ability to keep up one's efforts constantly. Illness is definitely not a good companion on the way, for it can distract the attention, instead of being devoted. Devoted to God, we can think only of our physical pains. The steps in yoga that are concerned with the physical body are steps that should enable us to go the whole way, not the other way around. It is not a matter of making the body the center of all activities, nor of depriving it altogether. Yoga for one person can mean becoming healthy again through the practice of asanas. For someone else it can mean finding help in preparing for death, certainly not through practicing asanas, but rather by finding a way of reaching a peaceful state of mind where there are no feelings of guilt or blame. Perhaps in this case I would teach the person to pray. For a child it is interesting and meaningful to have a lot of physical exertion, but why should I teach an 80-year-old person to do a headstand or sit in the lotus posture? Krishnamacharya's student, the Maharaja of Kolhapur, demonstrating Asana, 1940. Yoga is primarily a practice intended to make someone wiser, more able to understand things than they were before. If asanas help in this, terrific. If not, then some other means can be found instead. The goal is always bhakti, or, to put it in my father's words, to approach the highest intelligence, namely, God. Q. When Sri Krishnamacharya was teaching, his explanations were always closely linked to the old texts. There was scarcely one explanation that did not contain a reference to an appropriate quotation from one of the writings of the sages of old. Was there one work that was most central to his teaching? A. The most important yoga text as far as my father was concerned was always Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. The other texts were certainly useful, but there was no doubt in his mind concerning the relevance of the Yoga Sutra. Another text that was important to him was Natha Muni's Yogura. In that text there are hints on practical procedures. It is a book much concerned with the question of how yoga can be adapted to each individual. There is a lot of detailed information about breathing in the asanas, for example. The Yogura contains a wealth of information that is not given in the Yoga Sutra. Furthermore, Natha Muni's text places great emphasis on bhakti, devotion to God. The Bhagavad Gita is also a great yoga text. It emphasizes the thought that the way to the highest power does not mean that we should neglect or refuse to carry out our duties in life. This is what makes the Bhagavad Gita unique. It tells us that our search should not be a flight from life. For anyone to whom the Vedas is important, the Bhagavad Gita is a significant text. It relates many of the things from the Upanishads in a way that is easy to understand, and surprisingly enough, it contains important hints on things like breathing techniques and nutrition. In details like this, the Bhagavad Gita is much clearer and more precise than the Yoga Sutra. A text like the Hatha Yoga Pradipika contains a lot of good information, yet the essential text is still Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Understanding the Yoga Sutra is a lifelong task. Each time you read it you can see something more, something different. I studied it 8 times with my father, and I think my father went on studying it throughout his life. Each time he went through the Yoga Sutra with me he could say something new about it. His last commentary on this text, written from 1984-1986, contained thoughts that he had never expressed before. In 1961 I studied the verse regarding Nabhikakra with him, but how much more information about the human body he put in his later commentary on this same verse. The Yoga Sutra is an inspired text on all levels, whether about the body, the breath, or the mind. Krishnamacharya and his family. Besides Natha Muni's Yogura, which goes into more detail and emphasizes the theme of bhakti, the Yoga Sutra was the seminal text for krishnamacharya. Q. Sri Krishnamacharya was a family man and had 6 children. Can you say a few words about his family life? A. My father was a very concerned person. He wanted all of us to do yoga and know everything he knew. At the same time, he found time to take care of our needs. I remember him taking us to the cinema when I was 8 years old. But somehow we children were much closer to our mother. She was the one we usually went to when we needed something. Q. What part did yoga play in the family? A. Whether we liked it or not, we all did yoga. Everyone, including my mother and my 3 sisters, practiced asanas. I remember seeing my mother doing asanas, prima, and meditation when she was expecting my younger sister. I was the least interested, I must confess. When my father was around, though, I pretended to practice asanas. My elder brother was the expert. Q. Contrary to the trends of the time, your father did a lot to promote yoga for women, and your mother practiced regularly. A. Yes. How she learned so much, I do not know. She must have picked it up from father, who taught at home. I never saw him actually teach her, but she was able to correct all our practices. She knew all the texts by heart, even though she did not have much schooling. Her sister was adept at yoga too. She used to accompany father on his lecture tours. And my sisters helped father in his classes. My youngest sister now teaches yoga. Some of our women teachers are former students of his, including my wife. The well-known American yoga teacher Indra Devi studied yoga with my father in 1937. Namagiriyamma, Krishnamacharya's wife, demonstrating Mahamudra. Q. It is interesting that your father chose family life rather than the life of a sannyasin. What was his attitude towards sannyasin? A. To be a sannyasin means to give yourself totally to a higher power, to God. I think my father was a great example of that. There was never any doubt that he felt that it was not he himself who did things. He regarded himself as powerless, and it was always the power of his teacher or God that worked through him. He always claimed that everything he said and did came from his teacher and from God. He never claimed to have discovered anything, but always said, "Nothing is mine, it all comes from my teacher or from God." To me, that is sannyasa. You cannot be a sannyasin and at the same time say you discovered something yourself. To be a sannyasin means to lay all that you do at the feet of your teacher or God. My father was an example of this. Those who met him often saw him take his teacher's sandals, a young Dazikakar, with his and lay them on his head as a way of saying that he felt he was small, sister and brother demonstrate, smaller than the feet of his teacher. I think my father was a sannyasin par excellence, and yet he was also a family man. He never experienced any contradiction between living with his family and living in the true spirit of a sannyasin. A young Dazikakar with his sister and brother demonstrating Paramatma Asana at a public lecture. Sannyasa in the sense of wearing orange robes, never staying long in one place but wandering about and begging for food was, in my father's opinion, no longer appropriate for our times. Manu, one of our great scholars, used to say that in these times of Kali Yuga, sannyasa has become impossible. My father's teacher told him that he must lead a family life, and Natha Muni says that family life is the most important part of one's existence. By that he does not just mean having children, but living as others do and having responsibilities. Even the Upanishads do not insist on sannyasa in the formal sense of the word. The Bhagavad Gita places no great value on sannyasa. In it, Arjuna comes to see that he should involve himself in life and not run away from his tasks. Perhaps it is appropriate for those who have carried out all the tasks they have to do in the world to choose the way of sannyasa, but there are not many like this. What was traditionally understood by the term sannyasa is nowadays no longer possible. Krishnamacharya with his grandsons Bhushan and Kaustuba and their mother Mrs. Menaka Dazikakar on the occasion of their Brahmopadasam or Sacred Thread ceremony, 1983. Q. You studied with your father for more than 25 years. How did you come to be a student of your father's? A. First of all, it is not quite accurate to say that I studied with him for 25 years. To say that gives the impression that I was like a student at university where the whole day is filled with studying. No, I lived with him for 25 adult years, and during that time I also studied with him. In this way, studying with my father was like going to a foreign country and slowly becoming familiar with the language, customs, and habits of the people there. That is how I learned from him. He taught me how to understand the important texts such as the Upanishads. I learned how to recite these texts and how to interpret them. He told me what I had to learn and decided what I should teach. For instance, when I was wondering whether to accept an invitation from the European Union of Yoga, he said, "Go to the yoga conference in Switzerland," and I went. He told me to go and teach Krishnamurti, and so I did, and my father told me how I should do that. Living with him, being with him, seeing him, eating with him, and so forth were the most important aspects of my life. I studied with him too, which is how I can now explain this and that to you from the Yoga Sutra. But my explanations contain more of my experience with him, my shared life with him, than his words themselves. All that has been a great gift for me. Everything happened in our house, his treatments, his teaching, our family life, everything. That was the essential part of my study with him. Krishnamacharya at 100 years old with Dazikakar. Q. What was his instruction like? How did he teach you and what did you learn? A. I learned asanas, but I only needed to work on them for 6 months or so. I was 25 and very flexible. He often took me with him to lectures. lectures and I had to demonstrate the asanas to the audience as he explained their particular details. He told me how I had to perform them, and I did what he said. A young Dasikakar demonstrating Padma-Mayurasana at a public lecture. I did not find the asanas difficult, and my own asana practice did not play an important part in his instruction. Much more time was taken up with the study of texts, learning to read pulses, working with sick people, and learning the important principles for teaching yoga. I had to teach first, and afterward ask questions. For example, I did not know how to teach yoga to pregnant women, so I asked him and he gave me advice. He watched my students closely and he watched my work with them closely. Even in 1989, the year in which he died, I never hesitated to ask him for advice, and he always gave me an answer. When I first began studying with him, he sometimes said, "What you are teaching at the moment is wrong." He said this in front of the students, but I did not feel any shame. On the contrary, I was happy that mistakes would thus be avoided. My students were not in the least put off by this practice. It was rather seen as good fortune to be given advice by the teacher. The well-being of the students was always central to our teaching, and I had no problem in telling them that I would have to ask my father for advice because I did not know enough myself. And my father was always very kind and told me what was to be done. This way of teaching requires kindness from the teacher and much modesty and humility on the part of the student. I can say that living with him and being able to observe and experience him working, treating himself when he was sick, preparing his meals and carrying out other rituals, all of this was the real yoga instruction that I received from him. Sharing a verse from the Ramayana. Of course there was the study of texts too, which took much more time than asana technique because once you have understood this there is nothing more to say about it. The texts provide the content of your practice and make what you are doing comprehensible. The study of certain texts was compulsory, and here too the relationship between teacher and pupil was beyond question. First I had to learn the text he chose by heart. These texts are recited in a particular way. There are certain rules, and there is a game made of listening and repeating them as you learn them. Only after you have learned them by heart are they explained, and the explanations are given in the way the teacher thinks appropriate for each student. Instruction like this is only possible when you live with your teacher. In earlier days this was indeed the only way teachers could pass on the old texts at all. Nowadays it is not so easy to live in such close proximity with your teacher. What can we do? I see a great difference between the struggle my father had to follow his path and the comfort I had in learning yoga. He left his home and went north into Tibet, far away from his people and culture, and stayed there for 8 years. I scarcely had to take a couple of steps to receive my instruction. We lived in the same house. At first I divided my time between work and study. Perhaps I missed out on something by doing it like this, but my father wanted it this way. I think that we do not necessarily have to live with a teacher nowadays. We should rather work in our own environment and then meet our teacher from time to time in order to find a point of reference. Having a point of reference is absolutely necessary. We need somebody who can hold a mirror in front of us. Otherwise we very quickly begin to imagine that we are perfect and know it all. This personal connection cannot be replaced by books or videos. There must be a relationship, a real relationship, one that is based on trust. Can you tell us something about your relationship with your teacher? My father was my teacher and he was a very lovely person. We were 50 years apart in age, so there was a great difference between us. His education and background were very different from mine, but what I remember most is that he always came to my level in working with me. I am a Western, educated person and he was a traditional teacher. He saw that I was different, so he adapted his teachings to me. I took that as a great example of what we can do as teachers for others. The fact that I was his son never interfered in the relationship, even though the relationship between a father and a son is different from the relationship between a teacher and a student. We were living in the same house with all our family members and others. I was a slow learner and would do stupid things, yet he never gave me any indication that I was lacking. He would only say words in support of me, such as, "You do not have the background I have," and he would patiently persevere with me. Q. Was the father/son relationship there also? A. When he was a teacher, he was a teacher. He would expect me to be on time. If he asked me to sit, I would sit. That is the Indian tradition. He had the ability to separate the teacher relationship from the father relationship. I also spent a lot of time as his son, doing the natural things that a father and son do together. Q. There is much interest these days in understanding non-dualism. Some teachers say that is all that is needed. What is the difference between the way your father taught and Advaita Vedanta? A. My father said about Advaita, and I quote, "The word Advaita has two parts, A, and Dvaita. So to realize Advaita we should first realize Dvaita. It is a very interesting idea. In other words, to realize Advaita, non-dualism, one must first realize Dvaita, dualism. We must start with the reality of our situation. Most of us are in dualism, and we have to accept duality and start from duality before it can become one, before we can know non-duality. Imagine, if there were only one, then there would not be the word or the concept of Advaita. The concept of Advaita itself implies two. Yoga links the two, and through this link the two become one. That is Advaita. So yoga is the step toward Advaita. The two must be recognized, then brought together, otherwise even the Advaita idea becomes an object. The moment I say I am an Advaitin, I am making the word Advaita into an object and I create division in myself. Yoga is the method and the approach to make this great realization a reality. That is why the greatest teacher of Advaita Vedanta commented on the Yoga Sutra, explaining the importance of yoga and emphasizing the importance of such things as nada sound and bandha body lock. He spoke of yoga as an important means for reaching that goal called Advaita. Father and son. Q. Many of today's spiritual organizations teach some form of yoga as part of their recommended path. But many of these yoga practices seem to be quite different from your father's recommendations, or they seem to emphasize certain aspects. A. What finally matters is what a person perceives. If somebody is happier through what these great organizations provide, then membership is right for that person. I have good friends who have greatly benefited from belonging to such organizations. They are not my students, but they have learned to practice yoga in my father's way. Their lives in these organizations have become much richer and brighter through practicing yoga. Q. There is a wide variety of yoga practices taught, and talk of many different kinds of yoga. Why is this? A. Because yoga is not fixed. Yoga is creation. I know the way that you teach will be different from the way I teach, and the way I teach is different from the way my father taught. We all have different experiences, different backgrounds, different perspectives on yoga and why it is important for us. So it is not a surprise that different people find different things through the same yoga teaching. Even in our own yoga institution, different teachers will teach in different ways according to their own perspective and priorities and interests in yoga. The Yoga Sutra says that each person gets different things from the same teaching based on his or her own perspective. There is nothing wrong with this. This is how it is. Q. It seems a little unusual, however, that several teachers, all of whom were students of your father, Krishnamacharya, have very different methods of teaching. A. Well, here there are two questions. How long was their association with my father? And how much did they have to be on their own when they were called upon to teach? My association with my father was very long. I observed him teaching others at different stages of his life from 1960 to almost the end of his life. He was teaching different people in different ways according to their needs, their age, their health, and so on. This taught me a lot of things. Further, for those 30 years I was exposed to many aspects of his teaching. I had the real thing day after day, so I could absorb much of his teaching, and at the same time I could always go back to him with questions and case studies. In that way he would help me with my teaching. Take your own case, for example. If you had some health problem, I could easily go and ask my father for help. So I had an enormous exposure that others who are now teaching were not able to enjoy. When called upon they found other ways of teaching, which is fine. Q. Can yoga be taught in a class situation, or should it always be one with the teacher? A. Many things can be taught in a class situation. Often the group support for people who share the same interests or difficulties can be very helpful, as in the group for patients of bypass surgery that we teach here at the Mandiram. As my father said, however, we are not magicians, and it is not easy to handle many people at the same time. In yoga, the purpose is to bring some change, and the teacher is the reference point. You always remember what the teacher told you, not what you read in the book or what he spoke in the class, but what he told you. You need the teacher, you need the intimacy. Yoga is intimate. There is no yoga between 1 and a million, yoga is between two, the teacher and the student. In the Upanishads it is beautifully stated, in education the first requirement is the teacher, the second is the student. What should happen between them is learning. How it should happen is through the constant teaching of that which will be relevant to the student. That is education. Q. Sometimes yoga is described as being a long and arduous task toward achieving a goal. What do you think? A. It depends on what the goal is. Most often, people are doing yoga for some simple reason, and they progress into more involved, step-by-step practices. Each step can be enjoyable, fitted to the reality of where each person is now. As my father said, if you go step by step, there will be no problems. Enjoy each step. Trying to leap many steps at once can be a problem. Q. Can anyone practice yoga? A. Anybody who wants to can practice yoga. Anybody can breathe, therefore anybody can practice yoga. But no one can practice every kind of yoga. It has to be the right yoga for the person. The student and teacher meet and decide on a program that is acceptable and suitable to the person. Q. All over the world there are many teachers who are known to be gurus. Many are from India, and others are not. There is a popular understanding now of the word guru. From the yoga tradition, what is a guru? A. A guru is not one who has a following. A guru is one who can show me the way. Suppose I'm in the forest and somehow I've lost my way. Then I'll ask a person, is this the way home? That person might say, yes, you go this way. I say, thank you, and I go my way. That is a guru. There is an image in the world today that the guru has a following and his students follow him like the Pied Piper. That is not good. The true guru shows you the way. You go your way. And then you're on your own, because you know your place and you are grateful. I can always thank my guru naturally and enjoy the relationship, but I do not have to follow him around, because then I am not in my own place. Following the guru's destination is another way of losing yourself. The yoga concept of svadharma means your own dharma or your own way. If you try to do somebody else's dharma, trouble happens. The guru helps you find your own dharma. Q. Was your father a guru? A. He never said so, but many people think so. Q. Why did he never say that of himself? A. That's a delicate question, but since he is my father, I can tell you. The guru is not one who says, I am the guru. There are great stories in the Upanishads of the guru who rejected the very idea of teaching. One of the qualities of a person who is clear, who is wise, is not to need to say I am clear, I am wise. There is no need to say this. The person knows the way and he or she shows the way. It is simple. Humility is one of the qualities of a clear person. There is nothing to prove to anybody. My father was like this. Children performing asanas at the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. Q. In 1976 the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram was set up in Madras. What kind of work is carried out there? A. We do essentially three things. First, we are available to anyone seeking help. Among those who come to us are people who have problems or those who are sick. This follows my father's tradition. Throughout his life as a teacher he was again and again asked for advice and help by people suffering from all sorts of illnesses. It was not our intention that this focus on working with the sick should come to be such a big part of the Mandiram's activities, but now we are recognized as an institution by the Department of Health. Teaching the children's teachers, an important activity at the Mandiram. Second, we offer instruction to anyone who asks for it. If someone wants to know about yoga, they can come and learn here. By instruction I do not mean just instruction in asanas. Yoga instruction at the Mandiram includes learning about the whole spiritual and cultural heritage of India. We give classes in the recitation of Vedic texts and there are classes on the important ancient texts such as the Upanishads, the Yoga Sutra, and the Yogura. The third area in which we work is in research and study projects. More by chance than anything else, we have begun asking ourselves how the various aspects of yoga can be investigated more closely. We are doing this so as to make our work in some way or other more comparable with other systems. For example, we have carried out research on the treatment of back pain and on our work with mentally handicapped people. Another project on which we are working is how to present my father's teachings to the public. Dizikakar teaching. Krishnamacharya, 1966. Krishnamacharya with his son Shrivasyam in Ardhadhanurasana. Krishnamacharya with student in Trikonasana. Part I. The practice of yoga. Krishnamacharya lecturing while a student demonstrates Sarvangasana. Krishnamacharya at age 46 demonstrating Athita Parasvakosana. A young Dizikakar demonstrates Vimanasana. Krishnamacharya in Svastikasana. Krishnamacharya demonstrating a variation of Vajrasana. Krishnamacharya in Samasthiti. 1. Yoga, concept and meaning. To begin, I should like to share some thoughts that might help us understand the many different meanings of the word yoga. Yoga is one of the 6 fundamental systems of Indian thought collectively known as Darsana. The other 5 Darsana are Nyaya, Vaidika, Skya, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. 1. The word Darsana is derived from the Sanskrit root ds, which translates as to see. Darsana therefore means sight, view, point of view, or even a certain way of seeing. But beyond these lie another meaning. To understand this one we must conjure an image of a mirror with which we can look inside ourselves. And in fact all the great texts introduce us to ways of seeing that create opportunities for us to recognize ourselves better. We look deeper inside ourselves as we come to terms with the teachings. As one of the 6 darsanas, yoga has its origins in the Vedas, the oldest record of Indian culture. It was systematized as a special darsana by the great Indian sage Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra. Although this work was followed by many other important texts on yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is certainly the most significant. Many different interpretations of the word yoga have been handed down over the centuries. One of these is to come together, to unite. Another meaning of the word yoga is to tie the strands of the mind together. These 2 definitions may at first glance seem very different, but really they are speaking about the same thing. While coming together gives us a physical interpretation of the word yoga, an example of tying the strands of the mind together is the directing of our thoughts toward the yoga session before we take on an actual practice. Once those mental strands come together to form an intention, we are ready to begin the physical work. A further meaning of the word yoga is to attain what was previously unattainable. The starting point for this thought is that there is something that we are today unable to do. When we find the means for bringing that desire into action, that step is yoga. In fact, every change is yoga. For example, when we find a way to bend the body forward and touch our toes, or learn the meaning of the word yoga with the help of a text, or gain more understanding of ourselves or others through a discussion, we have reached a point where we have never been before. Each of these movements and changes is yoga. Another aspect of yoga has to do with our actions. Yoga therefore also means acting in such a way that all of our attention is directed toward the activity in which we are currently engaged. Suppose for example that while I am writing, one part of my mind is thinking about what I want to say while another part is thinking about something entirely different. The more I am focused on my writing, the greater my attentiveness to my action in this moment. The exact opposite might also occur. I might begin writing with great attention, but as I continue to write my attention begins to waver. I might begin to think about the plans I have for the day tomorrow, or what is cooking for dinner. It then appears as if I am acting with attentiveness, but really I am paying little attention to the task at hand. I am functioning, but I am not present. Yoga attempts to create a state in which we are always present, really present in every action, in every moment. The advantage of attentiveness is that we perform each task better and at the same time are conscious of our actions. The possibility of making mistakes becomes correspondingly smaller the more our attention develops. When we are attentive to our actions, we are not prisoners to our habits. We do not need to do something today simply because we did it yesterday. Instead, there is the possibility of considering our actions fresh and so avoiding thoughtless repetition. Another classic definition of yoga is to be one with the divine. It does not matter what name we use for the divine God, Allah, Isvara, or whatever, anything that brings us closer to understanding that there is a power higher and greater than ourselves is yoga. When we feel in harmony with that higher power, that too is yoga. So we see that there are many possible ways of understanding the meaning of the word yoga. Yoga has its roots in Indian thought, but its content is universal because it is about the means by which we can make the changes we desire in our lives. The actual practice of yoga takes each person in a different direction. It is not necessary to subscribe to any particular ideas of God in order to follow the yoga path. The practice of yoga only requires us to act and to be attentive to our actions. Each of us is required to pay careful attention to the direction we are taking so that we know where we are going and how we are going to get there. This careful observation will enable us to discover something new. Whether this discovery leads to a better understanding of God, to greater contentment, or to a new goal is a completely personal matter. When we begin discussing asanas, the physical exercises of yoga, we shall see how the various ideas implicit in the meaning of the word yoga can be incorporated into our practice. Where and how does the practice of yoga begin? Should we always begin on the physical level? I would say that where we begin depends on our personal interests. There are many ways of practicing yoga, and gradually the interest in one path will lead to another. So it could be that we begin by studying the Yoga Sutra or by meditating. Or we may instead begin with practicing asanas and so start to understand yoga through the experience of the body. We can also begin with prema, feeling the breath as the movement of our inner being. There are no prescriptions regarding where and how our practice should begin. Books or yoga classes often give the impression that there are prerequisites for the study of yoga. We may be told that we should not smoke, or that we should be vegetarian, or that we should give away all our worldly goods. Such ways of behaving are admirable only if they originate within us, and they may as a result of yoga, but not if they are imposed from outside. For instance, many people who smoke give up the habit once they begin a yoga practice. As a result of their practice, they no longer want to smoke. They do not give up smoking in order to practice yoga. We begin where we are and how we are, and whatever happens, happens. When we begin studying yoga, whether by way of asanas, prema, meditation, or studying the Yoga Sutra, the way in which we learn is the same. The more we progress, the more we become aware of the holistic nature of our being, realizing that we are made of body, breath, mind, and more. Many people who start studying yoga by practicing asanas continue to learn more poses until the only meaning of yoga for them lies in physical exercise. We can liken this to a man who strengthens only one arm and lets the other one become weak. Similarly, there are people who intellectualize the idea of yoga. They write wonderful books and speak brilliantly about complicated ideas such as property and Atman, but when they are writing or speaking they cannot sit erect for even a few minutes. So let us not forget, we can begin practicing yoga from any starting point, but if we are to be complete human beings we must incorporate all aspects of ourselves, and do so step by step. In the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali emphasizes all aspects of human life, including our relationships with others, our behavior, our health, our breathing, and our meditation path. Krishnamacharya demonstrating eka pada urdhva prastapadasana variations. To the foundations of yoga practice. To explain yoga I shall refer to the ideas expressed in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, the guide to yogic practice that I prefer to any other text on yoga. In a certain way the Yoga Sutra is more universal than any other text because it focuses on the mind, what its qualities are and how we can influence it. As defined in the Yoga Sutra, yoga is the ability to direct the mind without distraction or interruption. No one can deny that such a process is beneficial to all people for living a focused and productive life. Other yoga texts talk about God, consciousness, and other such concepts that are not necessarily accepted by or consistent with various philosophies and religions. If I understand yoga as a path that is accessible to every human being, then it seems perfectly natural that my discussion be based on the Yoga Sutra precisely because questions about the qualities of mind are universal ones. Speaking in terms of God or a supreme being often disturbs people, regardless of whether they accept or reject the notion. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is exceptionally open, which is in part what makes it so profound. The notion of God is neither rejected nor forced on anyone. For this reason I think the Yoga Sutra makes yoga more comprehensible than any other text. Perception and action. An important concept from Patanjali's Yoga Sutra has to do with the way we perceive things, and it explains why we are always getting into difficulties in life. If we know how we create such problems, we can also learn how to free ourselves of them. How does our perception work? We often determine that we have seen a situation correctly and act according to that perception. In reality, however, we have deceived ourselves, and our actions may thus bring misfortune to ourselves or others. Just as difficult is the situation in which we doubt our understanding of a situation when it is actually correct, and for that reason we take no action, even though doing so would be beneficial. The Yoga Sutra uses the term avidya to describe these two ends of the spectrum of experience. Avidya literally means incorrect comprehension, describing a false perception or a misapprehension. Avidya confuses the gross with the subtle. The opposite of avidya is vidya, correct understanding. Now what is this avidya that is so deeply rooted in us? Avidya can be understood as the accumulated result of our many unconscious actions, the actions and ways of perceiving that we have been mechanically carrying out for years. As a result of these unconscious responses, the mind becomes more and more dependent on habits until we accept the actions of yesterday as the norms of today. Such habituation in our action and perception is called saskara. These habits cover the mind with avidya, as if obscuring the clarity of consciousness with a filmy layer. If we are sure we do not clearly understand a given situation, generally speaking we do not act decisively. But if we are clear in our understanding we will act and it will go well for us. Such an action stems from a deep level of perception. In contrast, avidya is distinguished by superficial perception. I think I see something correctly, so I take a particular action and then later have to admit that I was mistaken and that my actions have not proved beneficial. So we have two levels of perception, One is deep within us and free of this film of avidya, the other is superficial and obscured by avidya. Just as our eye is transparent and clear and should not itself be tinted if it is to see colors accurately, so should our perception be like a crystal, clear mirror. The goal of yoga is to reduce the film of avidya in order to act correctly. The branches of avidya we seldom have an immediate and direct sense that our perception is wrong or clouded. Avidya seldom is expressed as avidya itself. Indeed, one of the characteristics of avidya is that it remains hidden from us. Easier to identify are the characteristics of avidya's branches. If we notice that these are alive in us, then we can recognize the presence of avidya. The first branch of avidya is what we often call the ego. It pushes us into thoughts such as I have to be better than other people, I am the greatest, I know that I'm right. This branch is called asmita in the Yoga Sutra. The second branch of avidya expresses itself in making demands. This branch is called raga. We want something today because it was pleasant yesterday, not because we really need it today. Yesterday I had a glass of fruit juice that tasted delicious and gave me the energy I needed. Today something in me says, I want another glass of this sweet juice, even though I do not really need it today and it may not even be good for me. We want things we do not have. What we do have is not enough and we want more of it. We want to keep what we are asked to give away. This is raga. But the third branch of avidya is in a certain way the opposite of raga. It expresses itself by rejecting things. We have a difficult experience and are afraid of repeating it, so we reject the people, the thoughts, and the settings that relate to that experience, assuming they will bring us pain again. But also causes us to reject those things with which we are not familiar, even though we have no history with them, negative or positive. These forms of rejection are the expressions of the. Finally, there is abhinavisa, fear. This is perhaps the most secret aspect of avidya and its expression is found on many levels of our everyday life. We feel uncertain. We have doubts about our position in life. We are afraid that people will judge us negatively. We feel uncertain when our lifestyle is upset. We do not want to grow old. All these feelings are expressions of abhinavisa, the fourth branch of avidya. These four branches of avidya, singly or together, cloud our perceptions. Through them avidya is constantly active in our subconscious mind and as a result of this activity we end up feeling dissatisfied. For example, if asanas are being practiced in a class, we have a tendency to compare ourselves with others. We notice that someone is more limber than we are, and that comparison creates dissatisfaction. Yet the practice of asanas is not a sporting contest. Just because one person can bend forward further than another does not necessarily mean that she is more advanced in her yoga practice. Such comparisons lead to a satisfaction that relies on a feeling of superiority, or to a dissatisfaction that stems from a sense of inferiority. Such dissatisfaction often weighs so heavily upon us that it constantly haunts us and will not leave us alone. In both cases the origin of our feelings remains hidden from us. Let me give you another example of the persistence of avidya. Suppose I make a mistake in a discussion regarding the Yoga Sutra. Normally I would admit to the mistake and apologize. This time when my friend says that my opinions on this great text are wrong, I feel a pain deep inside myself. I feel sick. Perhaps, under the influence of asmita, I try to prove that my friend is wrong and I am right. Or abhinavisa may impel me to withdraw from the situation altogether. Either way, I reject that which challenges me instead of accepting the criticism and learning from the situation. Figure 1. Avidya is the root cause of the obstacles that prevent us from recognizing things as they really are. The obstacles are asmita, ego, raga, attachment, refusal, and abhinavisa, fear. As long as the branches of avidya are expanding, there is a great chance that we will make false moves because we do not weigh things carefully and make sound judgments. When we perceive that problems have somehow arisen, we can assume that avidya was instrumental in their making. Yoga decreases the effects of avidya so that true understanding can take place. We notice avidya more by its absence than its presence. When we see something correctly, there is a profound peace inside us. We feel no tension, no unrest, no agitation. For instance, when I am conscious of speaking slowly, I sense that there is a spring from which quietness comes, and vidya, clear understanding, is within me. But if I am not certain about what I am saying, I tend to speak too fast. I use unnecessary words and I might break off my sentences. So when our understanding is clear, we feel quietness and calmness deep within us. Constancy and change. If we subscribe to yogic concepts, then everything that we see, experience, and feel is not illusion, it is true and real. Everything is real, including dreams, ideas, and fantasies. Even avidya itself is real. This concept is called satvada. Although in yoga everything we see and experience is true and real, all form and all content are in a constant state of flux. This concept of continual change is known as Paramatma. The way we see things today does not have to be the way we saw them yesterday. That is because the situations, our relationship to them, and we ourselves have all changed in the interim. This notion of constant change suggests that we do not have to be discouraged by the existence of avidya. If things go badly, they can always change for the better. Of course, they could always get worse too. We never know what may happen in life, and that is why it is important to be attentive. Whether things get better or worse depends to a considerable extent on our own actions. The recommendation of a regular yoga practice follows the principle that through practice we can learn to stay present in every moment, and thereby achieve much that we were previously incapable of. Yoga subscribes to the notion that deep within us there is something that is also very real but, unlike everything else, is not subject to change. We call this wellspring Purua Ordra, meaning that which sees or that which can see correctly. When we are swimming in a river and cannot see the bank, it is difficult to notice the current. We are moving so much with the river that we may scarcely see its flow. But if we go to the bank where we have firm ground, it is much easier to see how the river is flowing. Purua denotes the position from which we can see. It is the power in us that enables us to perceive with accuracy. The practice of yoga encourages this unhampered seeing to simply happen. As long as our mind is covered by avidya, our perceptions are clouded. It is when we feel quietness deep within us that we know we truly understand, and it is this kind of understanding that can have a strong, positive effect on our lives by leading us to right action. This true understanding, which results from decreasing avidya, does not usually occur spontaneously. The body and mind are used to certain patterns of perception, and these tend to change gradually through yoga practice. It is said in the Yoga Sutra that people alternately experience waves of clarity and cloudiness when first beginning a yoga practice. That is, we go through periods of clarity followed by times in which our mind and perception are quite lacking in clarity. Over time there will be less cloudiness and more clarity. Recognizing this shift is a way to measure our progress. One may ask, is it an expression of asmita, the ego, when someone begins yoga because he or she wants to be better? Such a question may lead us to important discoveries about the meaning of avidya. We are subject to avidya, and when we notice that directly or indirectly it becomes clear to us that we have to do something about it. Sometimes our first step is the need to become better or feel more accomplished. It is no different from someone saying, I am poor, but I'd like to become rich, or I'd like to become a doctor. I doubt that there is anyone who really does not want to improve himself, and even if our first step springs from the desire to become better and is therefore rooted in the ego, it is still a right step because it takes us onto the first rung of the yoga ladder. Furthermore, we do not stay permanently committed to this initial goal of self-improvement. According to the Yoga Sutra, the recognition and conquest of avidya and its effects is the only ladder by which we can climb upward. The goal of wanting to make something better may be the first rung on the ladder. And it is indeed true that by practicing yoga we gradually improve our ability to concentrate and to be independent. We improve our health, our relationships, and everything we do. If we could begin above this first rung, this desire for self-betterment, then perhaps we would not need yoga. How can we climb this ladder? In Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, 3 things are recommended to help us do this. The first is tapas. Tapas comes from the root word tap, to heat or cleanse. Tapas is a means by which we can keep ourselves healthy and cleanse ourselves inwardly. Tapas is often described as penance, mortification, and a strict diet. But its meaning in the Yoga Sutra is the practice of asanas and prima, that is, the physical and breathing exercises of yoga. These exercises help get rid of blocks and impurities in our system as well as giving us other benefits. By practicing asanas and prima we are able to influence our whole system. It is the same principle as heating gold in order to purify it. The second means by which we can discover the state of yoga is svadhyaya. Sva means self and adhyaya translates as study or investigation. With the help of svadhyaya we get to know ourselves. Who are we? What are we? What is our relationship to the world? It is not enough to keep ourselves healthy. We should know who we are and how we relate to other people. That is not easy, for we do not have such a clear mirror for our minds as we do for our bodies. But we can see a reflection of our mind as we read and study certain texts, as we discuss them and reflect upon them. That is especially so with great works such as the Yoga Sutra, the Bible, the Mahabharata, and the Quran. By studying texts like these we can see ourselves. The third possible way suggested in the Yoga Sutra to approach the state of yoga is Isvara Pranidhana. Usually this term is interpreted as love of God, but it also means a certain quality of action. Practicing prima and asanas, keeping oneself healthy, and reflecting on oneself do not constitute all our actions. We also have to pursue our career, gain qualifications, and do everything else that is part of normal life. All these things should be done as well as possible. Yet we can never be sure of the fruit of our actions. That is why it is better to become slightly detached from our expectations and to pay more attention to the actions themselves. Altogether, these 3 ways of being health, inquiry, and quality of action cover the entire spectrum of human endeavor. If we are healthy, know more about ourselves, and improve the quality of our actions, it is likely that we will make fewer mistakes. It is recommended that we work in these 3 distinct areas in order to reduce avidya. Together they are known as Kriya Yoga, the yoga of action. Kriya comes from the word K, meaning to do. Yoga is not passive. We have to participate in life. To do this well we can work on ourselves. I have already explained that yoga is a state in which 2 things are joined into one. I also said that yoga means attentiveness in action, which is necessary if we want to achieve a point or a posture that was previously unattainable. The yoga of action, Kriya Yoga, is the means by which we achieve yoga as a state of being. Although it is only one part of yoga, Kriya Yoga is the practical branch of yoga that can lead to a change for the better in all aspects of our life. Krishnamacharya in Salavasana Variations. 3. The principles of asana practice. The practice of yoga gives us the chance to experience the many different meanings of the word yoga. We have already described yoga as a movement from one point to another, higher one that was previously beyond our reach. It doesn't matter whether this shift comes about through practicing asanas, through study and reading, or through meditation, it is still yoga. In our practice we concentrate on the body, the breath, and the mind. Our senses are included as part of the mind. Although it theoretically appears possible for body, breath, and mind to work independent of one another, the purpose of yoga is to unify their actions. It is primarily the physical aspect of our practice that people see as yoga. They will rarely notice how we breathe, how we feel the breath, and how we coordinate our breathing with our physical movement, they tend to only see our flexibility and suppleness. Some may want to know how many asanas we have mastered or how many minutes we can stay in a headstand. Much more important than these outer manifestations is the way we feel the postures and the breath. The principles that follow are ages old, developed by many generations of great yoga teachers. These principles describe in detail the asanas and the breath and, above all, how they relate to each other. They also establish guidelines for prima, the breathing techniques that will be described in a later chapter. What is an asana? Asana translates as posture. The word is derived from the Sanskrit root as, which means to stay, to be, to sit, or to be established in a particular position. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra describes an asana as having two important qualities, sthira and sukha. One sthira is steadiness and alertness. Sukha refers to the ability to remain comfortable in a posture. Both qualities should be present to the same degree when practicing any posture. Neither sukha nor sthira are present when we sit with crossed legs for a photograph if we have to stretch them out again immediately afterward because they are hurting. Even if we achieve the steadiness and alertness of sthira, there must also be the comfort and lightness of sukha, and both must be present for a certain length of time. Without both these qualities there is no asana. This principle of yoga is fulfilled only when we have practiced a particular asana for a certain period of time and feel alert and unstressed as we practice it. The following precepts only serve to ensure that every asana is practiced with both sthira and sukha. Beginning from where we are. When we go into a posture or carry out a movement that feels tense, it is difficult to notice anything else besides that tension. Perhaps when we sit in a cross-legged position our only thought is for the pain in our strained ankles. In doing this we are not really in the asana we are striving for. We are obviously not yet ready for this particular position. Rather, we should first practice something easier. This simple idea is the foundation for our whole yoga practice. Practicing the postures progressively, we gradually achieve more steadiness, alertness, and overall comfort. If we want to make this principle of asana practice a reality, we have to accept ourselves just as we are. If we have a stiff back we have to acknowledge this fact. It may be that we are very supple but our breath is very short, or perhaps our breathing is alright but our body gives us certain problems. It is also possible to feel comfortable in an asana while the mind is somewhere completely different. That is not asana either. It is only possible to find the qualities that are essential to asana if we recognize our own starting point and learn to accept it. Joining breath with movement yoga is as much a practice involving breath as it is involving the body. The quality of our breath is extremely important because it expresses our inner feelings. If we are in pain it shows in our breathing. If we are distracted we lose control of our breathing. The breath is the link between the inner and outer body. It is only by bringing body, breath, and mind into unison that we realize the true quality of an asana. Recognizing our personal starting point begins with the exploration of the body, including the breath. For this we use simple breathing exercises, such as making the inhalation as long as possible. In this way we can observe whether it is the chest or the abdomen that expands and whether the back stretches with the breath. To explore the present state of the body, we use dynamic movements of the arms, legs, and trunk. For instance, we direct a group of yoga beginners in raising and lowering their arms. Then we ask, did the arm movement primarily stretch your back, or did it stretch another part of your body more? Some will say the movement stretched the back, others will have noticed extension predominantly in the shoulders. Figure 2, natural breathing in the forward bend, shown in 1. Uttanasana, standing forward bend, and 2. A variation of Kakravakasana, cat pose. The reason why people have differing experiences in this situation is because some large movements are initiated in various ways by various people. Those who have a stiff back find that all the effort for initiating movement at the arms comes from the shoulders, whereas those who are more supple will notice that the initiation happens at the scapulae, closer to the spine. Observing the body in this way is the first step toward changing uncomfortable or inefficient habits of movement and posture that cause stiffness and ultimately hinder the flow of vital energy through the body. This kind of investigation requires a teacher who can lead the students on their journey of discovery. If a teacher cannot do this, the students are not only in danger of misunderstanding yoga but they may also get discouraged. The first step of our yoga practice is to consciously link breath and body. We do this by allowing every movement to be led by the breath as we practice the asanas. The correct linking of breath and movement is the basis for the whole asana practice. The simple exercise of raising the arms on an inhale and lowering them on an exhale helps us find the rhythm of combined breath and movement. Figure 3, natural breathing in the backward bend, shown in 1. Vipadapitham and 2. Bhujangasana. Normally we are not conscious of our breathing. It is an automatic process and we do it without will or volition. For breath and movement to be coordinated, our mind must attentively follow their union. When we do this, inhalation and exhalation are no longer automatic but become a conscious process. Finding the natural link between breath and movement is the most important aspect of asana practice. It requires determining whether it is the inhalation or the exhalation that is amplified or made easier by a certain movement, and then making sure that that breath is the one we combine with the movement on which we are focusing. Continuing with our example of the arm movement described above, the natural breath rhythm would show an ease in inhaling as we raise our arms and an ease in exhaling when we lower them. Also, the length of the inhalation and exhalation would determine how quickly we raise and lower our arms. In practicing this simple movement we can learn one of the basic principles of yoga, that is, to become fully involved with our actions. The consciously directed breath supports and strengthens the natural coordination of breath and movement. For instance, on a natural exhalation the ribs sink while the diaphragm rises and the front of the belly moves back toward the spine. The same movement happens internally in every forward bend, that is, the ribs sink and the belly is pushed back toward the spine. So in order to amplify the natural breath, we breathe out in all exercises where a forward bend is the primary movement of the body. The examples in figure 2 show the breath cycle connected to the movement of the forward bend. In performing backward, bending postures such as Dvipadapitham, table pose, or Bhujangasana, cobra pose, the movement of the ribs raises the chest and causes the spine to bend backward. By deliberately combining the backward bend with an inhalation, as shown in figure 3, you make the movement easier and more effective. In contrast with forward bends, which are only done on the exhalation, in certain backward bends we have the freedom to breathe out or in. This will be discussed later. Figure 4, beginning Matsya and Darsana, half spinal twist, with an exhale follows the natural breath rhythm. Twists are also closely linked with a specific breathing pattern. As the spine and ribs rotate, the space between them is reduced and the abdominal area is slightly compressed, the diaphragm meanwhile moves upward. So if we combine the beginning of the twist with an exhalation, as shown in figure 4, we are following the natural pattern of breathing. The rules for linking breath and movement are basically simple: when we contract the body we exhale and when we expand the body we inhale. Exceptions are made only when we want to create a particular effect in the asana by altering the natural breathing pattern. As I have stated before, we do not simply inhale and exhale without attention, but instead we make sure that the breathing initiates the movement. The length of the breath will determine the speed of the movement. This integration of breath and movement in time becomes quite natural. There are various ways of encouraging the conscious awareness of breath and movement, thereby avoiding mindless repetition. One good method for this is to introduce a short pause at the end of every movement. After raising the arms as we breathe in, for example, we can pause momentarily. Then after we have lowered our arms with the exhale, we can pause for another moment. Pausing at the end of each movement helps us remain conscious of both the movement and the breath. Losing this attention causes our practice to become mechanical, and then we are no longer doing yoga. The fullness of breath. While one goal is to direct the breath quite consciously during our asana practice, we are also aiming at making our breathing, both the inhalation and the exhalation, fuller and deeper than it normally is. Figure 5. Movement of the diaphragm and rib cage through a breath cycle. The movement of the diaphragm during a breath cycle is shown in Figure 5. From the rest position, A, the diaphragm moves downward on inhalation, B. After the lungs have been filled, the diaphragm moves back to the rest position, C. In the process, a deep inhalation expands the rib cage, B, by making the ribs rise, thus moving the diaphragm down and slightly straightening the spine in this region. On a deep exhalation, the opposite occurs, the front of the belly moves toward the spine, the diaphragm rises, and the spine settles back into its starting position. People often breathe only in the abdomen, without expanding the chest. Others hardly use the diaphragm at all, restricting their breathing to the upper chest. Very tense people or asthmatics can sometimes hardly move the abdomen or chest at all when they breathe. The technique for gaining a fuller breath consists of consciously expanding the chest and abdomen on inhalation and consciously contracting the abdomen on exhalation. This simple breathing technique described below, together with the integration of breath and movement, is a means for bringing greater depth to the quality of our yoga practice. I suggest that when we inhale, we first fill the chest and then fill the abdomen, and as we exhale, we release the abdomen first and then finally empty the upper lobes of the lungs in the chest region. 3. This is contrary to the way of breathing taught in many yoga classes. The technique I am suggesting has the great advantage of stretching the spine and straightening the back. The moment we start to breathe in, the ribs rise and the spine, to which they are attached, is extended upward and slightly straightened. When using the other technique of breathing first into the abdomen and then into the chest, the abdomen expands so much that it inhibits the expansion of the chest and consequently the spine is not extended enough. As well, the abdominal organs are pressed down rather than the diaphragm being given room to move freely by the rising action of the chest. Because we are interested in breathing that assists the movements of the body and does not hinder the extension of the spine, this chest, to abdomen breath is best to use. Experiment with both methods and feel the difference. The breath is the intelligence of the body. Let's explore further the possibility of feeling the breath as it moves in and out. By doing this, the quality of our breathing while we are practicing asanas gradually improves. When practicing an asana, our attention should be directed toward the central point of the movement of breath. For instance, the main action when we breathe in moves from the upper chest to the navel. When we breathe out, the action is mostly in the abdomen. Our attention is on these movements. Consciously following the breath is a form of meditation in which we try to become completely one with the movement. This is the same attention to action that we discussed earlier. Whoever masters this can direct his attention toward any sort of activity. In order to produce a fine, smooth feeling when we breathe, we narrow the flow of breath in the throat, producing a gentle breathing sound. It is as if there were a valve in the throat that we close slightly in order to control the breath. The measure for this control is our sound, which becomes very gentle and ultimately should not require any effort or create any feeling of tension. After this technique is mastered, the sound is present during both inhalation and exhalation. This technique, known as ujjayi, allows us to hear as well as feel the breath as it becomes deeper and longer. The practice of this technique has two advantages. First, we are closer to the flow of our breath and in this way can remain more alert during asana practice. Second, the sound tells us when we have to stop or change in asana. If we do not succeed in maintaining a gentle, even, quiet sound, then we have gone beyond our limits in the practice. The quality of breath is therefore the clearest indication of the quality of our asana practice. Another technique for invigorating and deepening our practice is to lengthen the natural pause between the exhalation and inhalation and between the inhalation and exhalation. After breathing out, we hold the breath and stop moving. Moving, We do the same after breathing in. The length of time we hold the breath is critical. If the breath is held too long, whether following inhalation or exhalation, the body will rebel. In order to introduce this practice safely, we make quite sure that holding the breath does not disturb the inhalation or exhalation in any way. For example, while we are practicing an asana in the usual way, we may perhaps breathe in comfortably for 5 seconds, then breathe out for 5 seconds. We might then try holding the breath for 5 seconds following the exhalation. On the next inhalation we might notice that we need to draw the breath in more rapidly than before. That is a clear indication that we are not yet ready for this breath retention technique. If holding the breath is too demanding, inhaling or exhaling or both will be negatively affected. Be certain you are ready for this technique before using it. Remember that yoga is a practice of observing yourself without judgment. However beautifully we carry out an asana, however flexible our body may be, if we do not achieve the integration of body, breath, and mind, we can hardly claim that what we are doing is yoga. What is yoga after all? It is something that we experience inside, deep within our being. Yoga is not an external experience. In yoga we try in every action to be as attentive as possible to everything we do. Yoga is different from dance or theater. In yoga we are not creating something for others to look at. As we perform the various asanas, we observe what we are doing and how we are doing it. We do it only for ourselves. We are both observer and what is observed at the same time. If we do not pay attention to ourselves in our practice, then we cannot call it yoga. The principles of Bhimha and Lagana are illustrated here by Krishnamacharya, age 79, in Vrabhadrasana, above, and in Pasamattanasana. For the careful construction of a yoga practice, how can we realize the qualities of sthira and sukha, the steady alertness and the lightness and comfort of being necessary for a good yoga practice? The Yoga Sutra refers to a beautiful image from Indian mythology to illustrate the concept of sthira sukha. The story tells of Ananta, the king of snakes, floating on the ocean, his long snake body coiled to form a comfortable couch on which the god Vayu lies. The snake's 1,000 heads reach up and out like a protective umbrella over Vayu. On the umbrella rests our earth. The snake's body is soft and gentle enough, sukha, to serve as a couch for a god, and at the same time is firm and steady enough, sthira, to support the whole earth. We should endeavor to bring those same qualities of gentleness and steadiness to our asana practice, all the while making sure that we exert progressively less effort in developing them. In order to attain sthira and sukha, our yoga practice has to be sensible and well structured. When we practice asanas, there is a starting point where we begin, just the same as for anything else in life. The starting point for this practice is the condition of our entire being at that present moment. It therefore helps to know as much as possible about our whole constitution so that we can advance step by step, developing our practice in accordance with our abilities. Developing a yoga practice according to the ideas expressed in the Yoga Sutra is an action referred to as Visakrama. Krama is the step, Nyasa means to place, and the prefix 6, translates as in a special way. The concept of Visa Krama tells us that it is not enough to simply take a step, that step needs to take us in the right direction and be made in the right way. Visakrama thus describes a correctly organized course of yoga practice. It is a fundamental concept in yoga having to do with constructing a gradual and intelligent course for our practice, and is important to employ irrespective of whether we are dealing with asana practice, krima, or some other aspect of yoga. We start our practice where we are and look toward a certain goal. Then we choose the steps that will lead us toward realizing that goal and will then gradually bring us back into our everyday life. But our daily practice does not return us to the exact place we started. The practice has changed us. A famous yogi of old named Vamana is reputed to have said that without Visa the asanas of yoga cannot be mastered. The concept of Visakrama is useful as a guide for carrying out not only our yoga practice but also all the tasks of our everyday life. To realize the qualities of sthira and sukha in your asana practice, you must first gain an understanding of the steps necessary for preparing your body, your breath, and your attention for the asana you have chosen to practice. You must also consider whether there is an immediate or long-term danger of problems arising from the practice of this asana and, if so, determine the poses necessary to bring balance to the breath and body. Counter poses yoga teaches us that every action has two effects, one positive and one negative. That is why it is so important to be attentive to our actions. We must be able to recognize which effects are positive and which are negative, so that we can then emphasize the positive and try to neutralize the negative. In following this principle in our asana practice, we use postures to balance the possibly negative effects of certain strenuous asanas. We call these neutralizing postures counter poses or pratikrayasana. 1. Let's take the headstand as an example. Many people say that they would not make it through the day if they didn't practice asana, the headstand. First thing in the morning or in the evening before going to bed, they do a headstand for 10 minutes, and they feel very good doing it. They do not prepare in any way for the asana, they simply stand on their head and then they break off their practice. What they often do not notice for a long time to come is the negative effect hidden in this position. Although doing a headstand is good because it reverses the usual effects of gravity on the body, while in the headstand the weight of the whole body is carried by the neck. Our narrow neck, which is designed to carry only the weight of the head, now has to support the whole body. Consequently, after practicing the headstand, it is very important to offset any possible negative effects by doing an appropriate balancing exercise. If we do not, we may experience feelings of dizziness, the neck may over time become chronically stiff, or, worse still, the vertebrae in the neck may deteriorate or become misaligned, jamming the nerves between them, a situation that leads to overwhelming pain. Unfortunately, this occurs quite frequently for those who are not studious in using counter poses to balance the effects of the headstand. It is brought home to me again and again how much damage can be caused by practicing in this way. Proper asana practice is not just a matter of advancing step by step to a certain goal, we also have to come back into a position from which we can comfortably resume our everyday activities without experiencing any harmful effects from our practice. Writing about the necessity of counter poses reminds me of an interesting story. I have two brothers. When we were children, we had a very tall coconut palm in our garden. My older brother kept telling me and my other brother that he knew how to climb tall trees like this one, so we challenged him to show us. I can still remember how we taunted him, chanting, "Climb up, climb up." In the end, he did climb the tree. Going up was fairly easy, but when he wanted to come down, he did not know how to do so without falling. There was nobody around who could help him, so he was stuck in the tree for quite a while. So it is with our asana practice, it is not enough to climb the tree, we must be able to get down too. When we do a headstand, we should be able to come back into a normal position without any problems. It is important to balance the headstand with a counter pose such as the shoulder stand, Sarvangasana, in order to relieve the pressure on the neck. For any one asana there may be various counter poses possible, depending on where the tension is felt. Whenever we feel excessive tension in any area of the body after a posture, we must try to alleviate it with a counter pose, that is, the simplest asana that relieves the tension. The counter pose for a powerful forward bend is a gentle back bend. Conversely, a powerful back bend will be followed by a simple forward bend. Again, the reason for practicing counter poses is to return the body to its normal condition and to ensure that no tensions are carried on into the next posture or into our everyday business. Observing the principle of dual effects and thereby determining the sequence of asanas in your session is one way of bringing Visakrama into your practice. The step-by-step awareness of Visakrama should also be a part of the practice of an individual asana, and the development of our practice over time. Designing a session. Now we are going to look at how to build the sequence of an asana session. The way we develop our session will depend on our immediate needs, our long-term goals, and what activities are going to follow our practice. A course of asanas designed to prepare the body for playing tennis will be different from one meant to help someone remain alert in a mentally taxing environment, and that will differ from a practice meant to help someone with chronic insomnia to relax deeply before going to bed. Figure 6, Asanas to begin a practice, Tadasana, 1, Uttanasana, 2, Apanasana, 3, and Raised Vajrasana, 4. There are countless asanas and, it seems, just as many books about them. How does one begin to make choices about which postures to practice? The list of possible asanas are endless because the body's great flexibility allows almost limitless possibilities as far as posture goes. It is entirely up to the student, in light of both his lifestyles and goals, to determine whether it makes sense to practice many or only a few asanas and to determine which ones are worthwhile. Different people require different asanas. For instance, many of us are so stiff in the legs that we need to practice a lot of standing postures. On the other hand, dancers with flexible, well-formed legs are so supple that there is no reason for them to put a lot of effort into standing postures. There are a great many asanas, but we do not need to practice all of them. It is much more important to find a direction for our practice and to draw up a sequence of asanas that meets our own needs and through which we can discover the qualities that are to be found in asana practice. A teacher is an important resource for helping make these choices. Our point of departure for practice will be different every day. That may be difficult to put into effect in the beginning, but the more we get into the practice of an authentic yoga, the more we will understand how to observe ourselves and find our own starting point each time. The situation from which we begin our practice is constantly changing. Let's say I hurt my knee yesterday and therefore cannot sit cross-legged in the morning. I would then do exercises to help me to loosen my knee. It is important to examine our condition before starting and continually throughout our practice. If we bend forward from a standing position, for instance, we will feel whether our legs and back are stiff. These things are easy to discover when we begin to be attentive to the body. Once we begin to observe ourselves in this way and recognize our starting point, we are able to develop our practice for the greatest possible benefits. Certain principles should be followed in determining how to begin a session. Before doing an asana, we should be sure that the body is ready for it. For instance, if we try to sit cross-legged first thing in the morning before observing our bodies or preparing our legs properly, we can very easily damage our knees. Gentle warm-up exercises will ease the body into readiness. It is not a good idea to start our practice with back bends or twists. We should begin each practice with the simplest poses, asanas that bend the body forward naturally or those in which we raise our arms or legs are suitable. Beginning with the simplest postures, we gradually progress toward more difficult ones. Some asanas with which we can begin our practice are shown in Figure 6. These include Tadasana, Mountain Pose, Uttanasana, Forward Bend, Apanasana, Wind, Relieving Pose, and Raised Vajrasana, Thunderbolt Pose. Figure 7 shows asanas with which we should not begin our practice.
Okay, so it's been about 2 hours. I'm gonna stop this for now. And then if you guys want longer videos or shorter videos, let me know. I'll probably try and record some more tonight while I'm sleeping, just have it going. I'm probably gonna start turning off the microphones. I don't know if you can hear me. Probably gonna start turning off the microphones, just so I can not worry about the noise that I'm making around my house while I do this. But I plan on going through all the rest of the books, like all the books ultimately, and making them available on YouTube in audio format for free. For anybody that wants them. Teacher trainings going forward, anybody in this class, whomever. So stop recording for now, and see you in class.